Charlie Kirk was recently shot and assassinated by a sniper, a shocking and tragic event that shook the political and cultural landscape to its core. Regardless of political affiliations, the death of a young thought leader in such a violent and radical way leaves behind grief, pain, and questions. My condolences go out to his family, his loved ones, and all those who support and care. This is not a moment for celebration, but a moment for mourning, contemplation, and reassessment. A man has lost his life, and a family has lost their son and their friend. A wife has lost her husband, and several young children are left to be brought up without their father. That truth must sit before anything else. Whether Charlie Kirk should be remembered as a martyr, worshipped as a hero, or seen as a cultural icon is beyond the focus of this discussion. That is for others to argue, and that debate belongs elsewhere for now. What I want to focus on here is one particular line of rhetoric that Charlie Kirk once made during his life. A statement that stuck with me, and has larger implications. He once said that empathy was just some new age concept. He basically said he did not align with empathy, called it damaging, and instead preferred sympathy.
Bill Clinton in the 1990s, it was all about empathy and sympathy. I can't stand the word empathy, actually. I think empathy is a made-up New Age term that does a lot of damage, but it is very effective when it comes to politics. Sympathy I prefer more than empathy. That's a separate topic for a different time.
That statement is revealing, because it exposes a fault line in how people today like Charlie Kirk think about human support, emotional connection, and how they drive a rigid hard line between sympathy and empathy through the distorted personal lens of how they understood their faith. To me, dismissing empathy as a purely New Age concept is to cut it off from everything that it started from. Its deep biblical roots, its godly heritage, its cultural history and heritage that stretches back through Greek philosophy, German aesthetics, English psychology, and modern relational understanding. At the same time, it is also true that the language of empathy also really has been embraced and expanded in New Age circles, where it has taken on a slightly shifted nuance of meaning within the last 30 to 60 years. So the incredibly real paradox here is that empathy is both, surprise, surprise, a New Age concept, and, surprise, 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 a critical, must-have, can't-live-without biblical concept. What is empathy anyway? For most people, empathy simply means feeling what someone else feels, or deeply understanding what somebody else feels in a way that's relatable. It is the ability to connect with another person's emotions and feelings so directly that their emotions and feelings become taken onto your own, even just for a moment. When someone is hurting, you hurt. When someone is suffering, you suffer with them. When someone is angry, you feel that anger rise up in you too. When somebody is joyful, their joy spills over into you. Empathy is when you catch someone's vibe or mood, and it resonates inside you as if it were happening to you as well. Empathy is connecting with the heart. It's really nothing more complicated than making a one-to-one emotional connection with a heart-to-heart. It's the simple act of aligning your inner feelings and heart with another person's feelings and heart. You feel their pain, their sorrow, their happiness, their relief, their fear, their joy, their excitement. You're not standing on the outside observing them, being cold and indifferent. You're standing with them, hand in hand, on the inside, resonating together on the same frequencies. It's two people jiving to the same emotional rhythms, tuned into the same emotional wavelengths, generating the same waves of feeling. That is empathy in its purest, plainest form. The word empathy itself has a very deep history. Its root is the Greek word empathia, which means passion, feeling, or emotional state. It comes from en, meaning inward or inside, and pathos, meaning feeling, suffering, or emotion. Already in the ancient world, this word carried the sense of being caught up in someone else's emotional currents. It was not yet empathy as we know it, but it set the foundation. It was the act or event of entering an emotional state, of experiencing anguish or suffering, of being gripped by some feeling. Centuries later, in 19th century Germany, philosophers began speaking of Einfühlung, literally feeling into. This was used to describe how we project our own inward feelings into objects, into art, into architecture, into other forms and patterns. To gaze at a sculpture or a cathedral wasn't to just see it, but to feel into it. To let your inner being resonate with its curves and proportions. It was about participation through feeling, not just perception through sight. If you wanted to sculpt the next marble bust, you would feel and grip and wrestle with the marble, measuring its curves and seams, learning its weight and tension.
The marble.
First, an artist must concentrate and visualize his concept.
Now you've got it.
I gotta embrace the marble.
Right.
I gotta sniff the marble.
Well, okay.
I gotta lick the marble. I gotta wash the marble. I gotta date the marble. I gotta be the marble. I've got it. I have seen the sculpture within.
Here you go, buddy.
With this tool, I shall give birth to art.
Oh, boy.
How's this, Squidward?
It's beautiful.
You would feel the clay, the paintbrush, the canvas, the masterpiece underneath it all. All of it demanding a kind of inward resonance. It was about anthropomorphizing or personifying, projecting human feeling into what might otherwise be cold material. When the English-speaking psychologists translated Einfühlung into English in the early 20th century, they coined the word empathy from the Greek. Around 1908 to 1909, it entered psychology through figures like Edward Titchener. He described it this way: "Not only do I see gravity, and modesty, and pride, and courtesy, and stateliness, but I feel and act them out in the mind's muscles." At its very conception in English, empathy was not yet about human compassion, but about an aesthetic resonance of feelings. It was about feeling into shapes, movements, and forms, about modeling, simulating, and going through the motions, and knowing it thoroughly, with feeling and emotions present and projected. By the 1930s and 40s, the center of gravity shifted. Empathy moved from art and aesthetics to human interaction and relationship. Psychologists and therapists began using the term to describe what happens when one person feels out the inner state of another person. Two definitions emerged and remain central to this day. The first was affective empathy, the ability to emotionally resonate with another person's feelings, to feel with them. The second was cognitive empathy, the ability to conceptually understand another person's perspective, to see the world through their eyes, to understand their mental world and motivations, even if you do not exactly feel what they feel. This mid-century definition became the mainstream one, the one still taught in schools, therapy, and communications training today. It is the definition that most people agree on and use frequently. It is also the definition that aligns directly with biblical teaching. To dismiss empathy in this sense is to dismiss one of the most central and universal human capacities. It is no small thing. It is the bridge between psychology, spirituality, and everyday kindness, love, and compassion. In the last 60 years, especially in the last 30, a new layer has emerged, especially in New Age spirituality. The empath, especially in New Age circles, became not just someone who feels with others, but someone who feels so openly, so sensitively, who feels a little bit too much. Someone who absorbs emotions and energies like a sponge. The empath became a person with porous boundaries, someone who can walk into a room and sense its emotional climate without a word being spoken. This was described in terms of energy, aura, vibration, frequency, and psychic sensitivity. It is easy to dismiss this as strange or fringe, but in truth it mirrors something very real about empathy. The empath is simply an exaggerated picture of emotional openness. It is empathy stretched to its farthest edges. And while the language may differ, the function is not foreign to biblical spirituality. The difference is intention and alignment. A Christian empath feels deeply in order to love and serve others and align with the Spirit of God, to constantly go deeper into love. A Buddhist empath feels deeply in order to cultivate a sense of liberation through compassionate heart and mind. Even a Satanist empath might, in theory, practice the same openness, but direct it toward empowerment, manipulation, or some self-serving goal. The function, the resonance, the openness, the emotion, it is the same. The difference is what you align it with, what you aim it toward, what you do with it. Empathy, whether or not the word itself appears, is seriously everywhere in Scripture. Romans 12:15 commands us very directly. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Celebrate with those who celebrate. Cry with those who cry. Weep with those who weep. And mourn with those who mourn. This cascade of imperatives leaves no room for cold detachment. It is a command to step inside the joy and pain of others. 1 Corinthians 12:26 tells us, if one member suffers, all suffer together. If one is honored, all rejoice together. Galatians 6:2 says it plainly, bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Philippians 2 tells us, look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others, having the same mind as Jesus Christ. And of course, Jesus Christ himself summed it all up in the command to love your neighbor as yourself. These passages are not suggestions. They are not New Age experiments. They are not sensitive fluff or a hippie plotline. They are commands written into the very structure of Christian life. They tell us to practice empathy not selectively, but radically, not occasionally, but continually. Empathy is woven into the ethic of Jesus and Paul. It is how the community of believers is supposed to live, with a shared joy, shared sorrow, shared burdens, and shared celebration. Now let's pause and talk about sympathy, the word Charlie Kirk said he preferred. Sympathy and empathy are not exactly the same. Sympathy is noticing someone's pain and saying, I'm sorry for you. It's pity. It's acknowledgement without participation. Sympathy is a surface-level response, a polite gesture, a verbal band-aid. It says, I see you hurting, and I disagree with it. But it does not actually enter into the hurt. Empathy, by contrast, is the willingness to feel with. It is the decision to step inside someone else's shoes, to let their emotional reality resonate inside you. Sympathy operates at a distance, safe, detached, maybe often patronizing. Empathy operates at the heart, costly, vulnerable, transformative. Sympathy is standing on the riverbank and saying, wow, the water looks cold. Empathy is stepping into the river and saying, yeah, it's cold, but I'll swim with you until we get to the other side. Why would Charlie Kirk prefer sympathy? Maybe because sympathy is easier, safer, more detached, less commitment, less energy used. Sympathy doesn't really require much alignment of the heart. Sympathy doesn't demand vulnerability. Sympathy lets you feel superior while pretending to be supportive. It's the half measure of compassion, the hollow shell of care. And while sympathy has its place, it cannot fully substitute for empathy. To elevate sympathy over empathy is to accept a shadow instead of the real substance. It is to confuse pity for love, when in truth, biblical love demands more. But before we move on, there is one more important point. Empathy is not just a free-for-all, wild running, endless outpouring of emotional openness. Without discernment, empathy can go wrong. The Bible itself warns us, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4:23. That means empathy cannot be practiced as careless exposure. It must be practiced as careful love. If you wear your heart constantly on your sleeve, you will be hurt. If you give your emotional energy away to everyone indiscriminately, you will burn out. Empathy without wisdom can lead to compassion fatigue, to being drained dry, to being manipulated by those who only want to use your openness for their own ends. Some people will prey on an open heart. Some people will take advantage of kindness. And the Bible doesn't call us to naivety. It calls us to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So yes, we are commanded to forgive endlessly, to 70 times 7, and to turn the other cheek. But what is it really saying? It is not saying that you should allow yourself to be endlessly abused. It is saying accept the here and now, what you cannot control without force. But plan for a better path forward into a better future, to establish reasonable boundaries. That your heart should always be capable of releasing bitterness, always capable of returning to love. But forgiveness and reconciliation are not necessarily the same thing. You can forgive someone and still establish boundaries. You can love someone and still say no. Empathy without boundaries is not biblical empathy, it's emotional chaos. True empathy requires discernment. It requires listening to the Spirit about when to step in and when to step back. It means loving deeply and powerfully, but not foolishly. It means carrying others' burdens, but not abandoning your own soul. It means feeling with others, but not being consumed by others. In other words, empathy must be radical in the sense of persistence in the face of adversity, but it must also be rightly aligned, guarded, ordered, and Spirit-led. There is, however, one more angle to consider, and it is the very one Charlie Kirk himself was probably responding to when he dismissed empathy. His critique came in the context of politics. For example, in the 1990s, President Bill Clinton famously told voters, "I feel your pain." It became a rhetorical device, a way of projecting empathy as a political tool. The phrase stuck because it was so effective in making people feel seen. But to critics, especially conservatives, it came across as hollow, a performance of empathy for the sake of persuasion. It was empathy as marketing. And to be honest, Charlie Kirk wasn't wrong to point this out. Empathy, like any virtue, can be co-opted and misused. In politics, the word has been bent into a kind of theater, and virtue signaling, which weathers and wears out the word for the next era. Politicians have used the language of empathy to sway the hearts and minds of voters, to stir emotions, to create a sense of connection that may or may not have been genuine. Over time, this kind of usage can tarnish a word. It can leave some people skeptical, feeling that empathy is just another manipulative buzzword in the arsenal of campaign rhetoric. This is especially true within certain conservative circles, where suspicion of emotional appeal runs deep. To the contemporary conservative mind, empathy can feel like a kind of phony bleeding heart trick, a way of bypassing reasoned argument and appealing instead to sentiment and feelings, rather than logic and reason. In that sense, Charlie Kirk was right. Empathy has been misused, and its reputation has been damaged by political overuse and outright misuse and abuse. But here's the confession, the necessary balance. The misuse of a word does not erase its meaning. The abuse of empathy in politics does not destroy the truth of empathy in Scripture, relationship, psychology, or the quest for genuine human connection. Just because a politician cheapens the term does not mean Christ cheapened the practice. Just because rhetoric manipulates the heart does not mean the heart was wrong to feel. The answer is not to reject empathy altogether, but to reclaim it, to realign it with intention, with proper alignment, with truth. Empathy, when rightly understood, is not optional. It is the nervous system and the very reflex of love, the way the body of mankind, and especially the body of Christ, reclaims its own unity and sense of humanity. Radical empathy means staying when leaving is easier, listening when speaking would win in the argument, acting with and for another person, even when it costs you something. It means swimming alongside without drowning, thinking alongside without condescension, practicing compassion and nurture in real concrete ways. It is mindfulness, it is presence, it is perspective, it is practice. This is not some New Age novelty. It is an ancient biblical command. It is the radical ethic of Jesus and Paul. Whether you call it empathy, compassion, burden-bearing, solidarity, or love, it is the same reality expressed in different mirrors. The difference always comes down to intention and alignment. Who or what are you serving? What are you aiming this resonance toward? What spirit or purpose governs your openness? Who are you loving? How are you loving? Are you loving? Radical empathy means refusing to just look away, refusing to ignore or simply walk away. It means listening instead when talking would win you points. It means entering into another person's world and saying, your burden is my burden, your joy is my joy, your tears are my tears, your laughter is my laughter. Radical empathy is not about pity. It is about presence and service of heart. It is not about just feeling sorry. It is about feeling with your heart the whole way through. Radical empathy costs something. It costs a type of comfort. It costs distance. It costs the illusion that we are separate, that our lives are self-contained. But what it gives back is infinitely greater. Radical empathy is the nervous system of love, the reflex of compassion, the pulse of God's Spirit moving through human hearts. It is the practice of Christ Himself, extended through us. This is what it means to be human. This is what it means to be a Christian. This is what it means to love one another righteously. So, was Charlie Kirk right? In one limited sense, yes. Empathy indeed has been taken up as a New Age concept in recent decades, and it also has indeed been misused and even abused in political rhetoric. It has been cheapened by slogans like, "I feel your pain." And in that context, it can look like nothing more than a tool of manipulation. But in the greater and more important sense, he was dead wrong. Empathy is not a fad. It is not a psychic trick. It is not an occult invention. It is not a hippie plotline either. It is an ancient biblical command from Jesus and Paul straight to your heart. Jesus and Paul taught empathy directly and profoundly. To follow them is to rejoice with the rejoicing, to celebrate with the celebrating, to mourn with the mourning, to cry with the crying, to weep with the weeping, and to bear with the burdened. That is empathy, and that is radical Christian empathy, to have a heart and to use it. Charlie Kirk's death is tragic, and condolences belong to his wife, his family, and to the greater community. But rhetoric that dismisses empathy as weakness, or dismisses it as a superfluous trend, is rhetoric that erodes and corrodes humanity and community. Empathy rightly ordered and rightly aligned is what makes our arguments more honest and our communities more whole. Empathy is not just important, it is essential. Empathy is not just useful, it is life-giving, healing even. I'll say it one last time. Empathy is not just some soft virtue, it is the very heartbeat of love. Without empathy, compassion dries up, and without compassion, communities wither, erode, and collapse. Empathy is the bridge between people, the glue that binds relationships, the lifeline that carries us through sorrow into joy together. Christ's own soul is empathy. It is the echo of God's very spirit, calling us into greater unity, into the greater whole, into the greater cohesion. The Spirit is like that bottle of glue, and empathy is the glue's stickiness, the emotional bond, the heart bond. It is what holds us fast and true when everything else wants us to come apart. And that is the final word, and that is the truth worth carrying forward.